The sun was just a smear of apricot jam on the horizon, bleeding into the bruised purple of the pre-dawn sky. A thick, wet fog clung to the water, tasting of salt and secrets. It was a kind of morning that made the world feel small, like the universe was nothing more than a creaking hull, the chug of my diesel engine, the vast gray emptiness around it. Buddy was at the bow, his old grizzled snout twitching, reading the morning air like I read. He knew these waters as well as I did. He could smell a storm coming hours before the barometer dropped, could tell a school of mackerel from a pot of dolphin by the way the water shifted. For decades, this was my church, my office, my whole life. But things had changed. The ocean felt tired, not angry, not like in the great storms of my youth that test a man's soul, just weary, like an old man who'd told all his stories and had nothing left to give. The fish were fewer, smaller. The vibrant coral graveyards I remembered from my youth were now just pale boneyards. Sometimes I'd pull up my nets and find more plastic bottles and ghost gear than I would find cod or haddock. It was a quiet kind of heartbreak, the kind that settles deep in your bones over years. That day, I'd pushed the sea serpent further out than usual. I was chasing a rumor, a whisper from another old-timer about a deep trench where the big ones were still. The locals called the spot the Widow's Cradle, a morbid name, but fitting. It was a deep, bowl-shaped canyon on the seafloor, known for its unpredictable currents that could rock a boat with a strange, lulling rhythm right before a rogue wave would rise out of nowhere. It was a place that demanded respect, a place most of the younger fishermen with their fancy sonar and GPS systems gave a wide berth. But I knew its moods. I trusted my gut and the groans of my boat more than any blinking light on a screen. I cut the engine, and the silence that descended was profound. It wasn't empty. It was full of the soft slap of water against the hull, the distant cry of a lone gull, the gentle sigh of a swell. Buddy let out a low whine and came to sit by my, resting his head on my worn leather boot. "Easy, boy," I murmured, scratching behind his ears. "She's just sleeping." I let out the nets, the heavy mesh paying out into the murky green with a familiar, satisfying rumble. And then I waited. Waiting is most of a fisherman's life. You wait for the tide. You wait for the weather. You wait for the fish. You watch the sky shift from gray to blue. You feel the sun warm your weathered skin, and you become part of the rhythm of sea itself. Hours. I drank my coffee, shared a piece of my sandwich with Buddy, and watched the world wake up around me. It was just past noon, I felt it. The winch was set, the lines were taut, and I was starting the slow, methodical process of hauling in the morning's work. But the line went rigid. The winch motor screamed in protest, a high-pitched shriek of tortured metal. The whole boat listed hard to starboard, the deck tilting, sickening angle. My coffee mug slid off the console and shattered on the floor. "Whoa there, girl," I grunted, grabbing the rail for balance. My heart hammered against my ribs. This wasn't a snag on a rock. I knew the feel of a rock, a dead, stubborn weight. This was different. It felt anchored, like I'd hooked the very foundation of the world. I worked the throttle, trying to ease the tension, my knuckles white on the controls. The engine groaned, black smoke puffing from the stack. For a terrifying moment, I thought the line would snap. Or worse, the sea would simply pull the sea serpent under. Sweat beaded on my forehead, stinging my eyes. Every muscle in my old body, toughened by a lifetime of this work, strained against the impossible weight. Slowly, agonizingly, something began to give. The winch began to turn, one click at a time, each one a victory. Whatever was down there was coming up. It took the better part of an hour of the boat groaning, the engine complaining, and my own breathing coming in ragged gasps. Buddy paced the deck nervously, a low growl rumbling in his chest. He knew this was wrong. Finally, A dark mass broke the surface, shedding water and seaweed like a monster rising from the depths. My first thought was that I'd hauled up a piece of a wreck, but that wasn't right. It was a net, but it was like no net I had ever seen. It wasn't made of nylon or hemp. The fibers were a dark, oily green, woven in a spiral pattern that seemed to shimmer and shift in the light. It felt strangely organic, like hardened kelp, yet when I poked at it with my gaff hook, it clinked with the hardness of steel cable. It was ancient, covered in barnacles the size of my fist, strange, phosphorescent moss. The weight of it was immense. I managed to drag the tangled ball onto the deck with a final gut-wrenching heave. It landed with a wet, heavy thud, and inside the impossible tangle, something was trapped. It wasn't the thrashing of a fish or scuttling of a crab. It was a soft, rhythmic movement, a pulse. My curiosity, that old companion of every man of the sea, got the better of my fear. I grabbed my sharpest fillet knife, its blade honed over countless years, and began to cut away the strange, unyielding fibers. It was like cutting through wire. Sparks flew from my blade. Underneath the first layer was a thick cocoon of what looked like solidified sea silk, woven tight and dense. As I sliced through it, a faint light began to leak from within, soft, ethereal blue that painted my face and the weathered deck of my boat glow. My hands were shaking, but I couldn't stop. I pulled the last fibers away, and the thing inside rolled free. It lay there on the damp wood of my, and the world seemed to fall silent. It wasn't a treasure chest. It wasn't some strange deep-sea fish. It was the size and shape of a large human heart, and it was pulsing, a gentle, rhythmic beat that sent waves of that soft blue light radiating from its core. Its surface was smooth, almost pearlescent, like the inside of an abalone shell, but it was semi-translucent. I could see intricate, vein-like structures of light moving within it, a complex and beautiful anatomy that belonged to no creature I had ever known. It had no eyes, no mouth, no fins. It just was. I knelt down, my old knees cracking in protest. The air grew still. The slap of the waves seemed to muffle. I reached out a trembling, hesitant hand, my fingers callous, scarred from 1,000 hooks and lines. As my fingertips brushed, a jolt went through me. Not electricity, but recognition. A feeling of immense, sorrowful age washed. And in that moment, I felt the pulse of the light synchronized perfectly with the frantic beating of my own heart. It shouldn't exist. And there it was, lying on the deck of my boat, a captured piece of the ocean's soul, looking right through me. Time seemed to stop in the widow's cradle. The sun hung motionless, and the only sound was the thrumming pulse of the thing on my deck, the matching rhythm in my own. Kneeling there, with the salt spray drying on my face, I felt like a man who had stumbled into a church he didn't know existed. To throw it back felt like sacrilege, like tossing a fallen star back into the sky. Keep it. What in God's name was I supposed to do? A piece of the living ocean, my fisherman's mind, a mind trained to categorize, measure, to understand time, seasons, the habits of fish, completely adrift. With movements that felt both clumsy and reverent, I found my largest bucket, the one I used for live bait. I filled it with seawater. The water sloshing over the side carried it back. The thing was surprisingly light, its surface cool and smooth, like sea-worn glass. As I lowered it into the water, its blue light intensified, illuminating the inside of the bucket, a lantern from another world. The water around it seemed to hum, quiet energy. The journey home was the strangest I've ever made. As soon as I fired up the sea serpent's engine and turned her bow toward the harbor, the sea began to change. The usual choppy surface, the playful little waves that nipped at the hull, smoothed out into a sheet of polish. The water became unnaturally calm, a perfect mirror reflecting the pale sky. And the fish came, not just a few. Entire schools, vast shimmering cloud rose from the depth. Mackerel, herring, even a few great lumbering cod, fish I hadn't seen in these numbers since I was a boy, swam alongside my boat. They didn't flee from the engine's rumble. They escorted us, their silver bodies a silent, reverent. It was as if the ocean itself was paying its respects to the precious cargo I carried. Buddy stood rigid at the bow, not barking, but watching the bewildered intensity, his tail tucked low. He knew, I did, that this was a violation of the natural order. By the time the familiar shape of the harbor came into view, dusk was settling in, painting the docks hues of orange and deep purple. I felt a knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach. How could I explain this? I saw Graham, the new harbor master, standing on the pier, his arms crossed over his chest. He was a good kid, sharp and efficient, but his world was one of spreadsheets, fuel regulation, digital weather report. He had no room in his life for impossible things. I cut the engine and coasted into my slip as quietly as I could, throwing the rope with practiced ease. "Good haul, Earl," Graham called out, his voice crisp in the evening air. "Just sorting it," I mumbled, keeping my back to him, trying to shield the glowing bucket with my body. "Tired day." "You were out past the Cradle, weren't you? My radar tagged you. Risky water. The sea and I have an understanding," I said, my voice hoarser than I intended. I quickly covered the bucket with an old tarp, plunging the deck into near darkness. The faint blue glow was still visible through the thick canvas, a secret heartbeat. I felt his eyes on a mixture of concern and suspicion. I just gave a weak wave, secured my lines, and retreated into the dim solitude of my cabin, the bucket held tight in my hand. That night, sleep offered no escape. In fact, it was an invitation. As soon as I closed my eyes with the creature pulsing softly in the corner of my cabin, I was no longer in my bunk. I was adrift in a darkness deeper than any ocean trench. And then the visions began. They weren't dreams. They were memories, but not. I saw the world before men, before boats, before even the shape of the continents was familiar. I flew over vast, steaming oceans under a bloated orange sun. Colossal creatures with shells like mountains drifted through the abyss below, their movements slow and ancient. I witnessed the violent birth of islands, molten rock hissing as it met the water, creating land where none had existed. I felt the crushing pressure of the deepest trenches, the gentle warmth of the first sunlit coral, teeming with life forms so alien and beautiful they defied description. It was the ocean's autobiography was being poured directly into my mind. I felt its loneliness, its patience, its immense, slow-moving consciousness. I understood the language of the whales, not as sounds, but as emotion, deep currents of sorrow, their lost kin, epic sagas of hunts in the polar ice. I felt the life cycle of a single plankton, its brief, sun-drenched existence, a tiny, perfect poem. I woke with gas, drenched in sweat, the thin light of dawn filtering through the porthole. My head was pounding, filled with the echoes of 1,000,000,000 years. The blue light from the bucket seemed dimmer, its pulse slower. I staggered to the small, cracked mirror above my sink. The face that stared back was shocked. It was my face, yes, but it looked as if 10 years had been added overnight. The lines around my eyes were deeper canyons. Skin had a papery, translucent quality, and my hair seemed whiter at the temple. Tremor I'd never had before shook my hand as I reached up to touch my cheek. Buddy whined from the doorway, refusing to come further into the cabin. He looked from me to the bucket, a low growl of warning in his throat. He saw it. He saw what the thing was doing to me. It was giving me the wisdom of the ages, the soul of the sea itself. But it was taking my life in payment. It was feeding on my years, my vitality, my very essence, to sustain its own light in this world where it did not belong. For the next 2 days, I was a ghost. I didn't leave the boat. I ignored Graham's calls. I just sat there, watching the creature falling in and out of those devastatingly beautiful visions. I saw ships of men, from the first hollowed-out logs to the great iron dreadnoughts, all sinking into the cold embrace of the depths. I felt the poison of oils, the sting of their plastic waste, the silent scream of 1,000 coral reefs bleaching into bone. The ocean's pain became my pain. My body ached, a weariness that went beyond muscle and bone. It was a soul-deep exhaustion. I was becoming an archive, a living library of oceanic memory, but the pages of my own story were being torn out, one by one. On the third morning, I knew it couldn't go on. The light in the bucket was now just a faint, flickering glimmer, its pulse erratic like a failing heart, and as its light faded, so did the unnatural calm around my boat. A wind began to pick up, a low, mournful howl that whipped through the rigging. The sky, clear for days, was now filling with dark, bruised-looking clouds that were gathering directly over my slip. It wasn't a normal weather pattern. It was a storm being born out of grief, a tempest aimed directly at me. The ocean wanted it, and it was growing angry. The first wave hit the sea serpent not with a slap, but with the solid, bone-jarring punch of a heavy weight. The boat screamed, every timber groaning in a chorus of protest. I was thrown against the wheelhouse wall, my shoulder exploding with pain. On the floor, the bucket tipped, and the creature slid out a pool of its own fading light, its pulse now a frantic, desperate flutter. Buddy, who had been barking defiance at the wind, was knocked off his feet, sliding across the wet deck with a yelp of surprise. The storm wasn't just around, it was for us. The wind didn't howl, it shrieked my name. The rain came down, not in drops, but in icy, blurring the world into a churning chaos of gray and black. This was the ocean's rage, its grief made manifest. Looking at the pathetic, flickering thing on the floor, I saw the truth with a clarity that cut through the storm's fury. My awe had become greed. My wonder had become possession. I had taken something that was never meant to be held by human hands, and in doing so, I had broken a fundamental law. The ocean wasn't trying to kill me. It was trying to reclaim a piece of itself that was dying in my care. "All right, old girl," I grunted, pulling myself up, my bones aching with a weariness that felt ancient. "I hear you. I hear you." My hands, though trembling with the unnatural age that had settled upon me, found their familiar places on the throttle and the wheel. The engine coughed to life with a defiant roar, a challenge to the tempest. I had to take it back to the widow's cradle. It was a fool's errand, sailing into the heart of a storm I had caused, but it was the only penance I could offer. Getting out of the harbor was a battle. The waves crashed over the breakwater, turning the usually calm channel into a liquid war zone. The sea serpent bucked and plunged like a wild horse. I braced the bucket with my legs, trying to keep the creature from being smashed against the bulkhead. Buddy, recovering his sea legs, crawled to my feet, pressing against me, a warm, solid presence in the chaos. He was terrified, but he wouldn't leave my side. He trusted me. Even on this mad journey, out in the open water, it was worse. The world was reduced to a terrifying trinity. The heaving deck beneath my feet, the screaming wind in my ears, and the colossal walls of water that rose up out of the darkness, threatening to swallow us whole. These weren't waves. They were moving mountains, their peaks frothing with rage. I was no longer a fisherman. I was a flea on the back of a dying beast. The visions came again, not in sleep, but sharp and brutal in the flashes of lightning. They weren't of the ancient past anymore. They were of the future. I saw gray, silent ocean, flat and lifeless, sick. The water was thick and oily, coated. There were no fish, whales, just the quiet, suffocating finality of a world at its heart. The ocean wasn't just showing me its memories. It was showing me the consequences of failure. With a surge of adrenaline born of sheer terror and a newfound purpose, I wrestled at the wheel. Every instinct, every scrap of knowledge gleaned from 50 years at sea came in. I didn't fight the waves. I danced. I turned the bow into the face of a monster, rode up its churning side, and slid down its back into the trough, only to face the next one. The sea serpent groaned, her seams straining, but the old boat, she was as stubborn as I was. We were two old relics, making one last impossible. It felt like a lifetime, but it was probably only an hour before I felt the change. The waves, while still immense, became longer, more rhythmic. The wind's shriek softened, deep, resonant moan. We had entered the eye of the storm. We were back in the widow's cradle. The water here was an eerie, churning calm. The sea a bowl of black glass, surrounded by the towering walls of the tempest. I cut the engine, the silence deafening. I knelt, my joints screaming, and gently scooped. Its light was barely a spark, its pulse a faint, irregular twitch, cold in my hand. "I'm sorry," my voice lost in the wind. I didn't understand. I leaned over the rail, the wind tearing at my clothes. I didn't throw it. I lowered my hands into the churning black water, holding it for a final moment. I felt a faint pulse, what felt like gratitude, a final, fleeting connection. Then I opened my hands and let it go. For a second, nothing happened. A faint spark sank into the blackness, was gone. I felt a ache in my chest, the certainty of my failure. Then it began, a single point of blue light, deep, deep below. It grew, not like a lantern being turned up, but like a sun being born. The light expanded, turning the black water into a dome of brilliance. It rose toward the surface, a silent, beautiful explosion, a wave of pure energy, not of force, but of life, radiated as it passed through the hull of the sea serpent. The boat's old timbers seemed to deep hum vibrated through the deck. The light hit the storm wall. The tempest dissolved. It didn't blow away. It simply ceased to exist. The screaming wind fell silent. The towering waves collapsed into a gentle, rolling swell. The thick black clouds evaporated like smoke, revealing a sky full of stars so clear I hadn't seen their light 30 years. The ocean was reborn. The air was clean and crisp, smelling not just salt of life. A pod of dolphins broke the surface nearby, their sleek bodies arcing through the starlight in a joyful, silent ballet. The water around me was no longer tired and gray. It was a deep, vibrant blue, humming power I could feel in my bones. The journey home was quiet, the exhaust was clean, the simple tiredness of a hard day's work, not the soul leeching. When I looked in the mirror, back at my slip, the face stared still and old. The lines were still there and deeper, but the haunted, papery look was gone. My eyes were clear. I had been given a great and terrible gift. Given it, I still live on the sea serpent, right here in this hall. I still fish, though my hauls are smaller now by choice. I only take what I need. I spend most of my days on a porch, watching the water. Buddy's sleeping at my feet. He doesn't growl at the sea anymore. Sometimes, on a clear night, I think I can see a faint blue pulse deep in the water, slow, steady heartbeat. I never told anyone the full story. Not Graham, not a soul. They'd lock me away. I kept one thing, a single, small piece, that impossible net. It sits on my mantelpiece, dark, fibrous, hard as steel. It's the only proof I have that it was real. It reminds me that the world is full of wonders far beyond our understanding. It reminds me that the greatest treasures are not the ones we pull from the sea, the secret she allows. The greatest wonders of the world are not meant to be owned or understood, be witnessed and respected. True wisdom lies not in possessing a mystery, but in having the grace to let it go. My name is Earl McKenna, and these are my stories from a life at sea. If you've enjoyed this journey and want to hear more tales from the deep, please subscribe to our channel. Every story shared, light burning against the fog.